Hello, everyone. I'm Chef Matt, and welcome to PA120 Patissier. This is our week 8 live session, just over halfway. Last week was our very first cake assignment, decorating cake assignment, and I saw some really good things. I saw some things that still needed to be worked on. It's quite a jump going from, the macaroons, sugar, chocolate tempering right into cakes. But just it's all about giving it time to set up, re-whipping your buttercream often, and yeah, those two things. Just re-whip your buttercream often, build your cake, let it set up, bake your cake, let it set up, and then decorate your cake. Let it set up, and then put your border on the top of it. Okay. Now, cocoa powder, we're going to either cocoa powder, whatever cocoa powder is going to work. The question in the chat, what kind of cocoa powder? You can use whatever kind. If you use Dutch processed, it's going to be darker, and we're going to talk about that, but you can use whichever kind you want to. This week we're working with chocolate mousse and the mirror glaze cake, and let's go ahead and jump on into that. Share. All right, so we should be on the class page, and if you go to our class page under the instructor announcements, under week 8 tools, we have the lecture slideshow, the recipe note cards, and cake construction to give you guys the tips on how to put it together, and with the less steps, or I'm sorry, the fewest mistakes, the quickest steps, the most efficient way possible, because all of this stuff I've done a million times, so I can definitely help you with the shortcuts and the things that you can't shortcut. So week 8, this is the 2-stage method: devil's food cake, chocolate mousse, and mirror glaze. Skipped. Countdown, only 31 days left in the term, which means only 26 days left to the makeup deadline. Only 12 days until we start working with gum paste. So if you haven't gotten your gum paste yet, we need to get that, and that should be only 20 days until we start working with fondant. I will change that. But yet we start working with fondant in the last week. So by week 10, we need the gum paste, 8 ounces, floor wire, gauge 18 or 22, or 20 if you're only getting one. By week 11, we need 5 pounds of fondant, petal dust, green, and one other color. Thin straws, you can just pick those up at a fast food store. And a cake drum, 12-inch round, 12 millimeter thick. This term ends on March 30th, 11:59 p.m. Central Time on March 30th. And that is what is going on. We start working with our gum paste flower cones here. They have to be dry by here so we can start making our flowers here. And those have to be done here so that we can put them on our cake when we start working on it before here. If you wait until this stage to start making your gum paste cones, it is dominoes. It just puts you behind. And then at the end of the term, we are on spring break. This week, devil's food cake, chocolate mousse, mirror glaze, all of those are required. Discussion forum this week. We're going to talk about what that is in just a moment. Don't forget that if you are trying to get ahead to make your devil's food cake, if you're following the cake schedule that I showed you guys, to make your life easier, then you want to make a double recipe this time and make 1 8-inch and 2 6-inch. So you're going to double the recipe, 1 8-inch, 2 6-inch. Use the 8-inch for this week, the 2 6-inch for week 12. We're going to look at that more closely in a minute. I'm just putting that there as a reminder. For the discussion forum this week, you are going to look up a YouTube video of an unfamiliar, keyword is unfamiliar, decorating technique. Include a link to the YouTube video in your post and answer the following questions using these prompts. What is the design technique that you're looking at that you saw for the first time? Describe it. What appealed to you most about this design technique? Is this something you think you can do, or would it require extensive practice? Describe how, when you might be able to apply this new technique. Then you're going to comment on 2 of your peers' fellow peers' posts and compare the decorating techniques with what you found, with what they are talking about, and how are they similar or different. Depending on how much experience you have, you may is going to determine what you find, but definitely do something that you have not seen before. Okay, please do something you have not seen before and then just talk about it. It's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. 8 points for your initial post, 1 point for each additional response. Like always, if you do not get full credit and I have not left you feedback, please message me to find out what's going on, because chances are I just accidentally marked your grade. I put the wrong number down. It happens all the time. My fingers tripped yesterday afternoon putting in somebody's grade. And I hit 5 instead of 7. So definitely message me if it does not look right. How to post a link in the discussion forum. What you're going to do, you can find your link. You're going to come up to the bar at the top, the HTTPL bar, right click on it so it highlights the entire link. Control C, Control C, or right click copy. Then you're going to go to your discussion forum post. You're going to click on it to make a response, to make your initial post. And then down under the bottom, on the bottom right, I think it is, there's going to be, outside of the box, is going to be a button or a word that says advanced. Click on that. It should open a new window. Then when you click in the new window, you should be able to paste your link. And it will automatically do that. It will submit it, and that will be good. If you can't, just post the link in your initial thing, and it creates an extra step for people. Then people will have to click on it, copy it, open it. Whereas if you post it in the advanced, then people can just click on the link and it'll open, instead of having to copy it from your post and then open it, because we need to be able to see what you are talking about. So the easier you make it, the more people are going to look at it. Without the link to your video that you find, you are not able to get full credit without the link. So if you don't post a link, you're not going to get full credit. All right. Any questions about the discussion forum? I don't see any hands up. I don't see anything in the chat. I am going to keep going. Let's talk about the final assignment. Again, very quickly, because we talked about this last week. The final assignment is a 2-tiered cake, to an 8-inch base, 6-inch top. So what we're talking about for the cake schedule, if you kept your week 1 cake for the bottom, that's great. Looking at the cake schedule, this is what we bake in the first week. This is what we bake in the second week. This is what we bake in the third week. I went over this. I'm not going to go over it again, but you can reuse your cake from week 7 last week, or week 9 next week, the chiffon cake, to be your bottom tier for your 11 and 12, or your weeks 11 and 12 cake. All you have to do is, if you cut it, replace the piece after you take your pictures, put it back, wrap it up, freeze it, and then you can use it for the bottom, because you're just going to be covering it in fondant. For the top tier, since none of the assignments make a 6-inch cake to make the top tier, what I recommend doing is, this week, 1 time the recipe is what it calls for, makes 1 8-inch cake. We're going to put 2 layers of cake with a layer of mousse in between. Then we're going to glaze it with the mirror glaze. But what I recommend doing is do it 2 times, and then do your 1 8-inch cake for this week, and then do 2 6-inch cakes for week 11 and 12. So if you save your cake from last week and you make the recipe 2 times, and bake your cake off a bake of 2 6-inch cakes, then you have your cake baked off for week 11 and 12, and you don't have to spend the money for that. Okay, it's just a way to get ahead, and I'm not going to go into all that, but we'll explain it if you have any questions or confusion about that. You can also message me, and I can go over that with you and answer any questions you may have. All right, for this week, we're doing a devil's food cake with chocolate mousse and mirror glaze, due by Tuesday, 11:59 p.m. Central Time. We're baking 1 8-inch cake and cutting it in half. You can bake an 8 or a 9. I recommend doing an 8. It just works out better. It's round, devil's food, mirror glaze, chocolate mousse inside, no border on the top or the bottom. There's no writing on there. What I do want you guys to look for is to keep your layers of mousse as close to the same height as possible. So measure your mousse when you put it in the middle and then put the same amount on top. You're going to have mousse left over. Please don't put some in the middle and then put the rest on top, because that's not very professionally done looking. Okay. How do we deal with the bead? For this, I'm not sure what the bead is for. Also, should the week 7 be kept in the fridge or the freezer? Keep it in the freezer. Keep your week 7 in the freezer because the moisture in your cake will freeze, and it's harder for ice crystals to evaporate than it is for liquid to evaporate. So by freezing it, you're going to keep it moist for longer. Okay, so keep it in there. All right, when we talk about the different types of cocoa powder, we talk about the natural cocoa powder or the Dutch processed cocoa powder. If a recipe here in the United States does not specify, chances are they're just talking about natural cocoa powder. Most of the recipes that require dark cocoa powder will specify that in the recipe. Does the fondant cover the shell border? No, you'll remove the border. Remove the border, remove any decorations on the cake from week 7. Yeah, remove any of the decorations from the cake. Before you wrap it up. So yeah, you just want to wrap it up, remove the decorations, and just wrap it up plain without the border. Okay, it's just refrigerate your cake. Then you can use your little spatula and just pull it away from the sides. Just break it off and then smooth it out, and then you can freeze it. Wrap it and freeze it. All right, good question. Okay. Okay. So Dutch processed cocoa powder has just had an alkaline added to it, which neutralizes the it neutralizes it and makes it darker. Most recipes you can use them interchangeably for the most part, but just be mindful that if you are using the Dutch processed cocoa powder, it has an alkaline in it. It is going to create a darker, deeper color. The natural Dutch processed cocoa powder, the natural or Dutch processed cocoa powder will work in the devil's food cake recipe for this week. Either one will work, no problem. With the natural, the Dutch does have an acid or an alkaline added to it. So if there's an acid in your recipe, it will rise more. So usually if you don't do anything to add more or to add an acid to your natural cocoa powder, it's not going to rise as high. Okay, and that is what is going on with most of these. But you can notice the biggest thing is the dark color. The flourless chocolate cake recipe that we make in one of the other classes, I've made it with both the natural and the Dutch, and I don't like it with the dark. It doesn't taste as good. It tastes much better with the natural. So don't think just because it is special dark, it's better. It's not always the case, and keep that in mind. All right. This chocolate is for melting. This chocolate, same brand, is for cookies. This will work for melting, but you have to be mindful of it. You have to stir it while it's melting. You cannot put a pot on the stove, bring your water to a boil, put a bowl on top of it, throw your chocolate chips for cookies in there, and then walk away and expect them to melt. This has things done to it in the process of baking it so that they will hold their shape. They want to hold on to their shape in the cookies. These do not have that. That's why these are for melting and these are for cookies. These also do not work well for writing. If you try to write with these, like if you tried to write with the chocolate filigree decorations that we did, and you use these, you had a very hard time with it. They do not melt easily. But you can melt these and use them, but you have to take the extra steps. You have to stand there and stir it. Okay, milk chocolate or dark chocolate in the bag. Are you talking about for the chocolate has to be the 60% of the dark cocoa. You can't just do milk chocolate for the mousse. It won't work because that doesn't have the same, that has extra milk added to it, and it doesn't work as solid. So whenever you have a recipe for, chocolate with white, dark, or milk, you have to be chocolate specific for that recipe. You can't just substitute them out unless you're making cookies and you're just putting the chips in there. But if you're melting them to interact with other things, you gotta get a whole new recipe if you want to change the if you want to make a milk chocolate mousse instead of a dark chocolate mousse. Okay. Now this chocolate from Walmart, the Great Value chocolate, only has chocolate liqueur, sugar, cocoa butter, butterfat, soy lecithin, and vanilla extract, which is exactly what we want in a chocolate. Okay, that's all we want. So this chocolate actually tempers beautifully. Look how beautiful that is. It tempers beautifully. I would use the bar and not the chips. I have not tried tempering the chips, but I did pick some up to experiment with it and see how it works. But definitely this will work. You just have to chop it up before you melt it. You have to chop it up before you melt it. You have to chop any chocolate up before you melt it. Not only do you have to chop it up, you need to chop it up evenly. If you chop one of them up to be about the size of Monopoly dice, they all need to be the size of Monopoly dice. Otherwise, if you don't, and you have some small pieces and then some big pieces, your chocolate is not going to melt uniformly, and it's going to take some of it longer to melt, some of it's going to melt faster, and you're going to increase the chance of it coming out of temper. It's going to take you more effort to get it retempered when you go back to temper it. So definitely chop your chocolate all the same consistency. All right, this week we're dealing with mirror glaze. Why is it called mirror glaze? For the obvious reasons. It is highly reflective. Notice how you can see their card in here. This was a very well done mirror glazed cake, a beautifully done mirror glazed cake. So that is why they are called mirror glazes. They are highly, highly, highly reflective. Now that also means that because it is highly reflective, if your cake is not perfectly smooth and flat underneath it, it's going to show. The mirror glaze is not going to hide anything. Imagine if you had a silk tablecloth and somebody threw sand on your table and you put the silk tablecloth on top of it. That silk tablecloth is going to show every grain of sand on top of the table. Same thing with the mirror glaze. If your cake is not perfectly smooth, it is not going to be this shiny and reflective, which is what we want it to be. Already talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it again, but one time, bake it off. Yeah, I'm not going to go over that again. Let's look at the recipes for this week. So we're looking at week 8, the 2-stage cake method. Again, I put that in there a lot just so you guys remember. With the devil's food cake, this is a 2-stage method. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Prep your pan. Spray it with on the bottom. Cut your parchment paper circle to fit the bottom. Cut it to fit. Do not cut it too big. Cut it to fit exactly the bottom. Don't let it come up the sides. Cut it to fit. Then you're going to sift your flour, cocoa powder, baking powder, soda, all your dry. Sift those into a mixing bowl. Add the shortening and milk number 1. I forgot to go over the ingredients. We have cake flour, cocoa powder, salt, baking powder, baking soda, vegetable shortening, granulated sugar. Notice how I've got all of these grouped together. Then we have whole milk number 1, which is 84 grams. Then we have vanilla extract, whole milk number 2, which is 63 grams, and 84 grams of eggs. You can make this recipe half. If you make it half size, then you're making 1 6-inch cake. If you're making a 6-inch cake for this week, which is fine, that's absolutely fine, half the chocolate mousse recipe too, unless you just want to have extra chocolate mousse. And if you do, that's fine. Whenever I used to do this cake in demo, I would just put the extra mousse in cups, put them in my fridge, and then eat them whenever I want them. Great question in the chat. Michael is asking, does it matter if we spray the sides of the cake pan? You can spray the sides of the cake pan, but if your cake bakes correctly, As it bakes, it's going to pull away from the sides of your pan as it bakes. When it's done, it will pull away from the sides of the pan. You can spray it a little bit just to make sure that it does release. But if your cake batter is mixed correctly and there's no like lumps of butter or shortening or anything in there, if it's all very homogeneous and you're baking at the right temperature and everything is spot on, it should pull away and come out of there very, very easily. In the real world, it was very, very, very rare with most of the cakes that I worked with that we sprayed the sides. We would spray the bottom of the pan and then put the paper in there, and we would spray the bottom just a little bit to hold the paper down so that when we added the batter, the paper didn't slide around. And then we would spray on top of the paper just a little bit to make sure the paper removed from the baked cake after it comes out. But the three things we look for to see if a cake is baked is if we insert a toothpick, it comes out with a few crumbs, but no batter. It'll be moist, no batter though. The center, if we press it, will spring back, or the sides pull away from the side of the pan. So your side should pull away, so you should start to look for that, and that will help it to not stick. Great question. All right, when you have your milk, I recommend you warm it in the microwave very slightly. Again, very slightly. Don't bring it to a boil. We just want to make sure that when we're adding all of our ingredients together, that it's not going to break. Okay, we just want to make sure it's not going to break. Whole eggs, lightly beat them together before you go to add them in. Okay, then back. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Spray your pan. We already talked about that. Sift all your dry together. Boom, boom, boom. In the mixing bowl, add the shortening and the milk number 1 with the paddle attachment, low speed for 7 to 8 minutes. Stopping the machine several times to scrape it down. Now, let me tell you, if you do not scrape it down, let's say that you put it on and you let it mix on low speed for 6 minutes, and then you stop it and scrape it down, and then you let it finish, and that's all the scraping you do, your instructors can tell. It is very obvious. Okay, we can tell. All of your inside, your air cells are going to be very irregular. You're not going to have a beautiful, even, tender cake crumb. It is very, very obvious. If you need, set a timer for 2 minutes. And when the timer goes off, stop it, lower the bowl, scrape all around the bottom, scrape the sides, scrape off your paddle, raise it, go 2 minutes, lower the bowl, scrape it down, scrape the paddle, raise it back up, let it go 2 minutes. Do it. It will be worth it. I promise you, it will be worth it. Stop several times, scrape down the bowl and the paddle, scrape it well and often. Well and often. Then you're going to whisk together the milk number 2, the vanilla, and the eggs. With the mixer running, add this mixture to the batter in 3 additions. So add a third, very slowly. The slower you add it, the more homogeneous, the easier it is going to incorporate, the less likely it is going to break. So, for example, if I took the amount of my second milk, my vanilla, and my eggs, and I divided it into thirds, and I just dumped the first third in, it's not going to be as uniform as if I poured the first third in a slow, steady stream. Scrape it down about halfway, continue pouring it, scrape it down again around the outside and the bottom to make sure that it all gets incorporated. Then start adding your next third. Once you get it all in there, you're going to mix it on low speed for 5 minutes in the last stage. And the finished batter is going to be very pourable, very, very pourable. Pour it into your cake pan, give the pan several sharp raps on the bench. What you're doing, you're banging on the bench up and down, boom, 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 boom. One more just to be safe. What that is doing is it's having those air cells, kind of those irregular ones, kind of float to the top, and then they'll pop. So then you won't have weird irregular shaped air cells in your batter. Bake it immediately. This has got the baking soda and baking powder in there, so you need to bake it immediately. Because we're already going to get a reaction from the liquid, and we're going to get a second reaction, a second rise from the heat. So add it to the oven, get it in the oven, approximately 30 minutes until the center springs back. When it is touched lightly, toothpick inserted, comes out clean. Cool it in the pan for 10 to 15 minutes, then remove it. You don't have to let it cool in a wire rack, you can, but definitely let it cool before you wrap it for storage. With any cake we are doing this term, I always recommend baking your cake one day, refrigerating it overnight, and then cutting it and using it the next day. If you try to bake your cake and use it in the same day, the chances of you trying to cut it while it is warm is greater. And then it just kind of, it doesn't finish cooking all the way because there's carryover cooking. And the cake is going to continue to cook once it comes out of the oven. And the starches are going to finish gelatinizing inside of there. If you cut it too early, then some of the starches might not finish gelatinizing. It's going to be a little bit underdone. Also, when you try to cut it in half, it's going to peel up like a sweater, gets peels on it, those little round thing. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to roll up and ball up when you're trying to cut it in half. So definitely, you want to make sure your cake is cool before you cut it, and definitely make sure it is cool before you build the mousse in there. Any questions about the Devil's Food cake so far? Let's get that. So it should be very, very liquid when it goes in. Very, very liquid. Those are from the video. Very, very, very tender chrome. Should look almost like crushed velvet. Beautiful, beautiful tender chrome. Okay. Now, be careful of this. The eye. There are several things that can cause this to happen. It usually has to do with the liquid heat ratio. Like if your oven is too low, then this can happen. If your oven is too hot, but you have too much liquid in your cake batter, it can happen. And you can see there's lots of different variations on this. Like this one I know baked, the oven temperature was too high and they pulled it out too early, so the center didn't bake. This one has to do with the mix. It wasn't scraped well, and there is more baking soda and baking powder in the middle. There's more liquid there, and the outside was drier. I'm sorry, vegetable shortening. Any vegetable shortening will work for this. So they're just taking like the liquid vegetable and hydrogenating it to make it a solid. But any vegetable shortening will work for this recipe, and it should be in the baking aisle at the grocery store. All right, so just watch the video more than once. Actually, I think this is linked, and there's, what causes the eye? It's usually a temperature fluctuation. Bake too high at too high of a temperature. Poor positioning in the oven can cause it to happen. Opening the oven door too early can cause it to, rise and fall. Wrong size or the wrong type of bakeware. If you use a dark pan, it can cause it to happen. Or if the cake is underbaked, it can fall in the middle. If there's too much moisture in the recipe, so definitely scale your ingredients, scrape it down well. If it isn't homogeneous, if parts of it are more liquid than others, and it's a very liquid recipe. It is a very liquid recipe. So you want to make sure that it is all homogeneous and incorporated all together. All right, let's talk about the chocolate mousse. Do not start making chocolate mousse until your cake is cooled completely and you have cut it in half. Okay. Heavy cream, you can use heavy cream or heavy whipping cream. It's okay to use either. The difference is heavy cream has a milk fat of about 30 to 36%. Heavy whipping cream usually has a fat of about 40+%. One is for adding to coffee. The other one is for whipping. It has more fat, so that it will hold the whip longer. Okay to use either. Use whichever one is cheaper, whichever one you can get your hands on. That's what I do. Whenever I see cream on sale, I buy it and I keep it in my fridge because the higher the fat, it stays better for longer. Chocolate, semi-sweet, 50 to 65% is what you want to use. Okay, you're going to be melting it, so make sure that it's only those ingredients that we want. Don't use milk chocolate. We can't do that. Heavy cream, we already talked about. We're going to be whipping that to soft peaks. Water, start with about 30 grams of water. If you have more than 30 grams in there, it's okay, because the water is going to evaporate before the sugar will get to temperature. Okay, then we have sugar, corn syrup, then we have our egg yolk and our whole eggs. Key points: you have to build the cake in a mold, either a cake pan, a cheesecake pan, a springform pan, but it has to be built in a mold. If you make the mousse and you cut your cake and you try to build this cake like the mousse is buttercream, you're not going to get a good grade, because that is not what this is all about. Okay, so you have to build your cake in a mold. You're going to line it with plastic wrap or paper. I recommend doing paper, and save a little bit of the mousse after you build it. Save some so that you can do spackling if you need to fill any holes with mousse after you take it out of the pan, before you get ready to pour the glaze over it. Speaking of, after you make your cake and it sets and you unmold it, put it back in your freezer to chill. If you pour your glaze over your chocolate mousse cake immediately after you unmold it, you're going to get rounded edges, and you want to have nice, sharp, crisp edges. So you unmold your cake, you refreeze it, and then you pour the glaze over it. So unmold your cake, put it back in the freezer, make your glaze, get your glaze to temperature, then glaze your cake. You need a minimum of 12 hours for the mousse to set before applying the mirror glaze. So very important. I'm about to sneeze in just a second. So when that happens, just know that you guys knew it was coming. Melt your chocolate over a bain-marie. Set it aside. Whip the cream to soft peak. Remove it from the bowl. Set it aside. Put a small amount of water in a small pot with the sugar, corn syrup to like a wet sand consistency. Heat the sugar medium. Brush down the sides. Brush down the sides. Do not let the brush touch the sugar in the bottom. Dip your brush in water and brush it above the sugar crystals. Okay, brush that above the sugar crystals. I recommend doing that before you turn it on, because it's just less of a chance for the sugar to crystallize. Do not stir the sugar while it is cooking. Once the heat goes on, you do not stir it. So you can stir it when you put it in the pot to get it to that wet sand consistency. But once you turn it on, you do not stir it. Okay. You're going to cook this to 240 degrees, which is softball stage. You're going to put the eggs and the egg yolks in the bowl of the mixer with the whip attachment. Start whipping on low speed. I say low to medium speed. And I think that's what they do in the video too, but low speed, but no higher than medium speed. And depending on what kind of mixer you have, for example, my mixer is a professional mixer, like I got it from a bakery that was going out of business. It only has 3 speeds. But if I had a KitchenAid, the KitchenAid has got like 9 speeds. So there's more play around there than there is in my mixer, which only has 3 speeds. All right, with mixer on low speed, you're going to pour the softball sugar down the side of the bowl in a steady stream. Again, like we talked about before, try to move your pot slightly back and forth so that your stream dodges the whip as much as you can. And that keeps the sugar from landing on the whip and then getting thrown on the side of your bowl. So if you just pour it in and you don't move it, you're going to get a lot of sugar on the side of your bowl. If you move it slightly, just back and forth, so that the whip is going in and out of the stream and is in the stream as little as possible, it's going to combine better. Then you're going to turn it up to high speed, whip the eggs and the sugar until it triples in volume. About 5 minutes. It may take longer depending on your mixer. It may take longer depending on your mixer. Okay, so till it triples in volume. Because this is yolks and eggs, whole eggs and yolks, because there is the fat in there, you are not going to over whip your eggs. That fat that is in the yolks, that is in the eggs, is going to keep it from over whipping. I could put this on, secure my mixer so it doesn't fall off the table, and let this whip for literally a week, and it will not over whip. So you don't have to worry about that. It will not over whip. So make sure you get it to good volume. Once the mixture is cooled down to about room temperature, add about 2 ounces or 60 grams of chocolate to temper it. And what we're doing, we call it tempering. We're not talking about tempering like when we tempered chocolate to dip the truffles in. We're talking about tempering by bringing the two temperatures and textures closer together. If we don't add a little bit of chocolate at the beginning to make the consistencies more similar, it's going to lump up. So add 2 ounces, 60 grams, and mix it in aggressively. Mix it in aggressively. Once you get that mixed in, you're going to add the remaining melted chocolate to blend it. Once all of the chocolate is blended in, do not let it sit around. Use your spatula or your hand whisk. You're going to do the same thing. Add a little bit of your whipped cream in, again, to bring the temperature closer together. Then add your whipped cream in thirds until it is fully incorporated. At the end, when you're adding your cream, you do not have to wait for each addition of the cream to be fully incorporated before you add the next addition. Just like with making a genoise, you don't have to wait for all the flour in your first addition to get incorporated before you add the next one. But when you add your final 1/3, you want it to be completely homogeneous. We don't want to see any light, dark streaks. We don't want to see any marbling. We want it to all be the same color. Okay, you're going to fold this in very, very gently when you fold it in. Chill it covered in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it. Excuse me. If I make my cake yesterday and I take my cake and I cut it in half and I put it back in the fridge and then I make my mousse and I have my pan set up, I will build my mousse cake as soon as I make my mousse. I don't put it in the fridge and let it set up. I just go ahead and build my mousse cake. Okay. You don't have to let your mousse chill for 30 minutes in the fridge to start using it. You actually want to use it and get it to set while it is still very soft, because by letting it refrigerate and fully chill and then trying to build a cake with it, now you're breaking those bonds that have set. You have a very strong, excuse me, when your mousse sets the first time, you have a very strong bond. If you start breaking that by spreading it around, you're breaking that bond. So if you build your mousse cake when your mousse is still a little soft, excuse me, when your mousse sets, it will be very, very strong. And that's what you want it to be. Okay. Same thing, the note at the bottom is talking about the sacrifice. You guys are going to get very familiar with that. We've talked about it before. Just, you sacrifice to bring your tempering. You're bringing the temperatures, the textures closer to one another so that it doesn't lump up. It doesn't seize up. Okay. Any questions about the chocolate mousse? We want to get the soft peak, not stiff peak. If you get it to stiff peak, then we're going to actually end up deflating it to try to get this to combine. So soft peak, this, not this, because it's going to continue to work as we fold it in. So don't over whip it. Don't turn it into butter. All right. This is cream that has been over whipped. Even this is starting to go, but if I have to fold this into chocolate, I'm going to have to stick my hand in there like a tiger's claw and use my fingers as a whip to try to break up, because it's going to lump up and it's going to make little lumps, and I've got to make sure I get all of those broken up. So do not ever whip it. Soft peaks. All right, for the mirror glaze, do not start making your glaze until your cake is molded and refrozen, because you have to hit temperatures with it. And if your cake isn't cold when you glaze it, and your glaze isn't the right temperature, like if your cake doesn't, let's say you unmold it and you don't put it back in the freezer to set again, and you make your glaze right away, and you let your cake sit out and your glaze is warm, when you pour it over your cake is going to melt. Okay, it is going to melt. If over whipped, can you add some heavy cream to bring it back to normal? You can, but that's not ideal because now you're adding additional cream to it. So now you're throwing the ratios off. You're throwing the baker's percentage off for how much cream is supposed to be in there. It would be better, I mean, because the cream as it sits, if it's not over whipped too much, it will soften up and, you know, loosen up on its own. Because, you know, if you've ever whipped cream today and then tried to pipe with it tomorrow, you have to whip it because as it sits, it softens and separates. So it's the same thing. You can add a little bit of cream to it, but then you've got to whip it more to incorporate that cream to get it to loosen up. So yes, it can, but that's not what we want to do. We want to try to hit it right where it's supposed to be. So watch your cream when it is going. Do not use chips. Use the bar chocolate and chop it up. We also need gelatin powder, 15 grams, cold water, 30 grams. I don't know if this got changed in the recipe, but I think it says 22 grams. 30 grams is better for this. And I forgot to check the recipe, but I will. Then we have water, vanilla extract, sweetened condensed milk, sugar, white chocolate. This you can use the chocolate, but you've got to chop it up. You have to chop the chocolate chips up if you're going to try to use it for this. If you don't, it won't melt. Chop your chocolate up. Okay, chop your chocolate up. Fine chop. The finer it is, the better it's going to melt, the shinier your glaze is going to be. All right, completely freeze and crumb coat your cake overnight. We're going to talk about crumb coating it in just a moment, because if you build your cake the way I recommend, you don't have to crumb coat it. And crumb coating with mousse doesn't really work. But you want to make sure that your cake is frozen solid before you pour your glaze on there. Smooth out the top and the sides, fill any gaps with the extra mousse that you have. We're going to talk about that in just a second when we look at the cake construction part of this. Once your cake is frozen and you're ready to begin, sprinkle your gelatin over the cold water, stir it to moisten, and then let it sit while you heat your liquids. Bring the water, sugar, condensed milk, and vanilla to a gentle simmer. Turn off the heat, stir in the bloom gelatin until the mixture is fully dissolved. So make sure your gelatin dissolves. Pass it through a sieve to make sure you get out any, chocolate lumps or anything else. Pour the mixture over the white chocolate and stir gently with a spatula. Do not use a whisk. You want to avoid air bubbles. So use a spatula so you're not incorporating air into there. It should take 5 to 10 minutes for all of the for it to fully melt and to become uniform. If you are going to do more than one color, which you do not have to, then separate it into 2 different bowls. Okay, and then color one color and the other color. There are different ways to glaze mirror glaze cakes with different colors. In the video, the way the chef does it works good. I would only do 2 colors. I wouldn't recommend trying to do 3 or 4. I would do 2 and leave it at that, especially if this is your first mirror glazed cake. I wouldn't try to do 5 colors. It just ends up looking muddy and doesn't look very good. For a single color, blend the gel food dye. The gel is going to be better than using a liquid because the glaze has a lot of fat in it, and if you use a liquid food color instead of a gel, it is more apt to separate. So use the gel, blend it together. You can blend it in all the way if you want to do a solid color, or you can do it slightly to do a marble color. You want the glaze temperature to be about 92 degrees when you pour it over your cake. If you are going to marble 2 colors, then you want your first color to be a little bit warmer so that when you pour it over the cake and it starts to cool down, then when you add your second color, they are closer to the same temperature. Whereas if your glazes are the same temperature and then you pour one on. Now that one is going to cool down, and it's not going to be the same temperature that the other one is going to be. So you're trying to get them to hit the same temperature when you add the second one to the first one. Okay, then you can swirl them around, do whatever you want. Pay attention to how Chef does it in the video. So you pour in the center and then you kind of spiral out to make sure you cover the sides. When the glaze is between 90 and 94 degrees, pour it over the frozen cake. Be careful not to introduce any bubbles because it's hard to get rid of the bubbles. You can pop them with the toothpick, but you'd much rather not have them on there when you pour it over. When you are setting up your glaze station, you want to set your cake on either something smaller than your cake. So either cut a cardboard down to the size of your cake, put it on a pan or a can or something that is smaller than the cake. So when you pour the glaze over it, it runs down the sides, it runs straight down the sides and drips off the sides and does not collect on the bottom. If I have an 8-inch cake and I glaze it on a 9-inch board, then I'm going to end up with a lot of a foot around that. We don't want that. We want it to pour off nice and clean. I'm going to show you pictures about what I'm talking about. Pour the glaze over the frozen cake in a smooth, continuous pour over motion until the cake starts running on the side. If you want to add any luster dust, you can, but you add it before it sets up. Pop any bubbles with the toothpick. Use your spatula to scrape off to help it, like let it pour it over, let it go for like a minute, and then use your spatula to kind of help anything that's not dripping off come off the bottom. Don't freeze it. Keep it chilled until you're ready to serve it. Keep it chilled and let it defrost. Don't try to cut it frozen. Okay, so you want to make sure that it is defrosted before you try to cut it. Okay. This is going to work well for the glaze. You can use this, but you have to chop them finely. Again, these don't want to give up their shape. They want to stay in the shape. If you don't at least cut these in half, they're not going to melt. You're going to have a really hard time getting it to melt. You're going to have to stir the glaze a lot. It's going to drop down in temperature because it's going to take a lot of heat for these to melt, and you're going to have to warm your glaze back up, and it's probably going to split, and you're just going to have a bad time. Chop it up or do this. Okay, now I've told you, I've warned you guys. I recommend building your cake upside down. Okay, you want to build it in a pan larger than your cake. So if I bake off an 8-inch cake, I really want to build it in a 9-inch pan. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to get mousse all the way around the side. Because when I pour the mirror glaze over it, the glaze is not going to stick to any exposed cake. So if I've done a great job and my cakes are completely encased in mousse, when I pour the glaze over it, it's going to stick to the sides and be beautiful. Notice how there's nothing sticking out on the side. It's on top of a smaller pan. This is like a 6-inch pan. And then I'm going to pour my glaze right over it. I've got a tray set up with some paper underneath to catch my overrun. But my cake, notice the frost on it. It is very frozen when I'm getting ready to glaze it. The reason I build it upside down is because you're going to get a very, very, very flat bottom and a very smooth bottom, which is going to become your top. So if I put this down, put mousse down, put my cake, pipe around to get the mousse forced down the side, put another layer of mousse, then put my other cake, and then pipe my mousse around to get the sides completely covered like this. Let this freeze, then pop it out and turn it over. So I'm building it upside down, freezing my cake, unmolding my cake, turning it over, freeze the cake again, make my glaze my cake. Okay, so by building it upside down, this becomes the top, and I get a very smooth, flat top. Do not use the whip. Make sure your glaze temperature is between 90 and 94 degrees before you go to pour it over your cake. Make sure your cake is frozen. Because if I unmold it, if I use like a torch to unmold it, now what's around the edge is going to be soft because I've applied heat to it to get it out of the pan. So I need to make sure that sets back up, or when I pour my glaze over it, that will melt away, and then my sides will show. Here's how we poured it over. Notice how the glaze is dripping off, and it will set up. If your glaze is the right temperature and your cake is frozen, it will take about a minute, 15 seconds, and the glaze will set up. If your cake is frozen, but your glaze is too hot, then your glaze is going to be too thin. It's going to run off. We're going to see the mousse through your cake. And we don't want to do that. We want it to get all your temperatures right. Allow for runoff. Set it, the frozen cake, on something smaller cake. Have your tray set up to catch the mess. Don't just do this on your counter. That's not going to be a good time. This cake, notice this has got like a soft edge. It becomes very melted. It bends. Same thing here. Same thing here. The mousse, it did not get reset before we poured the glaze on there, and it just kind of buckled. That is not what we want. That is it. Let's look at the cake construction, because here's a lot more mistakes to look at. Already talked about that many times. Any of these, you can do it in any of these. Whenever I used to do it in demo, I always did it in a cake pan because it works. You can do it in there. But I always build it upside down. I always build it upside down. Build your cake, trim the top off, remove that, cut that in half. You got your 2 layers. So remove the top, cut it in half, boom, boom. 1 cake, 2 layers total. When you photograph your pictures, we want to see the crumb structure. I really want to see the inside of the cake looks like. I also recommend making a collar. Put paper on the bottom, then make a collar to go all the way around the side. The cleaner this is, notice how clean this is and how it's folded, and there's not a lot of wrinkles. That's what makes my side looks very smooth. Okay, that's what we want. Refreeze your cake after molding. It must be cold and hard. The mousse you have, like right here, if I have a hole, I can take some of the mousse and spread it on there to smooth it out, and then put it back in my freezer, and then glaze it. And then if there's any holes or anywhere where I bumped it, that will fix that. Okay, get your cake built as flat as possible. When you pipe the mousse, so there's a layer of mousse on the bottom, you're going to take the piping bag and pipe it around here to force it down here so that your cake is completely encased in mousse. Because, like I said, the glaze is not going to stick to the cake. So if your cake comes all the way to the edge and you have a layer of mousse, a layer of cake, a layer of mousse, a layer of cake, it's going to come down, it's going to pour over the side. When it gets here, it's just going to not stick. It'll drip down, and some of it will catch there, and then it is not going to be pretty. You want it to be beautiful and pretty. Do all the things I'm telling you to do. Okay, beautiful. Notice how the collar, nice and clean and smooth. Very purposeful. Okay, so this person did not build it upside down. You cannot get this spread as smooth as you want it to be. This person did build it upside down, and again, that's the way you're going to get this sharp edge and this flat top. Okay, it's just easier to build it upside down. Every chef I've ever taught this class with, all of them build their mousse cakes upside down. Build it upside down, then you flip it over, makes it easier. Okay, so yep, chocolate mousse on the bottom, devil's food cake, chocolate mousse, devil's food cake. Freeze it, flip it over, and now the top is the bottom. The bottom is the top. Definitely make sure your layers of mousse are equal. You're not going to use all of the mousse in this recipe. There's going to be extra mousse. Just eat it. Give it to your kids, give it to your neighbor, put it in cups, whatever you want to do. But don't do this, because in the real world, in a bakery, if I were to get this slice, I would say that, okay, the cake might be delicious, but they're missing that crucial step of making it perfect. So if they're cutting corners here, where else are they cutting corners? We want the layers to be equal. So we really want to have equal layers of cake and equal layers of mousse. Okay, and this is the only time, because we don't do this with buttercream, but this is a mousse cake. So we do want a lot of mousse to be in there. Scale, measure your mousse. I don't like saying I don't care. I don't care how much mousse you put in there. as long as this layer and this layer are the same thickness. You can do however much you want to do, as long as it's not too thin. It's got to be at least equal to the cake layers and equal to one another. All right. These are all examples of cakes. Notice the nice, sharp, clean edges on there, because they all have those sharp, clean edges because they were all built upside down, and they're all completely encased in mousse. So we're not, that's why the sides are all completely covered and beautiful. Okay. Pictures. One of the pictures didn't load. Okay, I got to figure out what's going on with that. So we need a temperature picture for your chocolate mousse. We want to see the temperature at 240 degrees. We also want to see the first step in the cake process with one cake layer of mousse inside the cake pan lined with plastic wrap or paper or aluminum foil. Or if you have a torch, you don't even have to do that. You can just build it right in the cake pan and then use a torch to heat the side to get it to come out. Okay, but we want to see the temperature of your sugar to make sure that you get the pat a bomb stage, because that's what this is. You got to make sure that that mousse is stable. Same thing with the glaze temperature. Remember, between 90 and 94 degrees. So I want to see the temperature right before you pour it on your cake. So take the temperature, let me see it, and then don't wait for an hour before you pour it over your cake, because now that's not the temperature. Take the temperature and then pour it over your cake. That's the way it should be. When it's between 90 and 94 degrees, you're ready to pour it over. And then you'll have a beautiful cake layer like so. Already looked at those. Gold leaf is not required. Gold leaf is expensive. You can put it on there. You don't have to. You can also do the gold dust. You don't have to. It's expensive. Some people want to. Not required. 2 colors is not even required. Beautiful. Here are some beautiful single colored. I picked single colors for all of these. That one's marbled a little bit. But like this red, this blue, this pink, that is all very, very stunning. It is breathtaking when it is done correctly. This is impressive. So if you want to impress people, follow all the steps the way that they are laid out. Watch your technique videos. Again, watch them more than once. Watch them once, watch them again, take notes, look at the recipe cards, make your cake, cool it, store it overnight, prepare your chocolate mousse, stack, fill your cake, freeze it overnight, unmold your cake, refreeze your cake, prep your mirror glaze, glaze it, then make your submission and submit it. And you can go ahead and look ahead to next week. Any questions? Oh, question chat, use toothpicks to guide the cut. You can just make sure that all your toothpicks are marked at the same height. So you've got to use something to make sure that all your toothpicks go in at the same height. I think Chef Marietta does a video of that. And you can absolutely do that. If that helps you with it, then yes, absolutely do that. All right, any questions about anything? A lot of information this week. I gave you guys a lot of secret tips that aren't in the videos about, they're not even secret, but aren't in the videos. A lot of information of what to do to get the most perfect cake you can. Okay, and you've seen, I had a lot of pictures of those cakes from my students that have done a good job with it. So it's not an impossible thing, but those beautiful, perfect cakes, that does not happen on accident. Okay, that does not happen on accident. You have to want that to happen and work for that to happen, Any questions? I know you guys can do it. You guys have blown me away with everything you've done. I know you guys can do it. All right, my cuckoo clock is going off. Nobody has any questions. I'm going to tell you guys have a great rest of your day. If you do have questions, reach out. If you haven't gotten your week 8 assignment in, please get it in before the deadline at 11:59 p.m. Central Time tonight. And I'll see you guys next week. Chef Matt, PA120, week 8 live session. See you guys next week.